Hello, and welcome back to Ethics and Other Messy Things. I'm Ashley Gardner Cormier, licensed social worker, and this is the space where we talk about the parts of social work that seem routine until you slow down long enough to realize they're not. So today we're talking about something that feels administrative, something we all do and rarely question: documentation. More specifically, the ethics of documentation tone. And before you click away thinking this is just about wording, stay with me. Because tone doesn't just shape perception anymore. It shapes systems. So, I'll let you know what I mean. Let's say, for instance, there are two social workers, they're sitting in the same room and they witness the exact same interaction. A client declines a recommended service. That's it. That's the whole moment. Later, they each go back to their respective workspaces, whether it's in their car or at a desk, because you know how we work, and they document what happened. One writes, quote, "The client was resistant and non-compliant." The other writes, quote, the client declined recommended services at this time. Same behavior, same client, two different narratives. Both social workers might believe they documented accurately, and they did. So you might ask, what's the difference? Tone. Tone is not neutral by nature, and it's important for us to take note of that. So we're going to slow this down for a second. When you read the word non-compliant, how do you feel or how do you receive it? There's a subtle shift, right? It kind of suggests opposition or defiance or a problem that needs to be managed. But declined at this time feels like autonomy, choice, capacity, if you will. And that difference isn't just cosmetic. It changes how the next provider walks into the room. Something as simple as word choice could be the deciding factor as to whether the client is seen as difficult or decisive. Documentation follows people. It follows them across agencies, hospitals, school systems, and even courtrooms, sometimes for years. So here's the first uncomfortable question I want to ask you. Are we documenting behavior, or are we documenting our interpretation of behavior? Because those aren't the same things. To take it a step further, we often talk about documentation as protection. If it's not documented, it didn't happen, right? But that's mainly for our own protection as professionals. We have to also be mindful of the fact that it works both ways. Documentation is also classification of our clients. And classification is power. The language we choose to use influences who gets approved for services, who gets flagged as high risk, who gets labeled as unlikely to engage. And if you think this only affects human readers, it doesn't anymore. Even if you personally don't use AI documentation tools, even if you write every single note yourself, your agency might be using AI somewhere in the pipeline. A lot of systems now use predictive risk scoring, automated triage tools, natural language processing to scan charts, and even algorithms to prioritize limited resources. And those systems don't read tone emotionally. They read patterns statistically. For example, in healthcare systems, risk scoring algorithms are often used to determine which patients receive additional care management resources. And some of these models historically use prior healthcare spending as proxy for need. But spending doesn't equal illness burden. So populations that historically had less access to care and therefore lower spending were scored as lower risk, even when their health needs were significant. The algorithm wasn't malicious, it was mathematical, but it amplified structural inequity because of the data that it was trained on. Now we're going to bring that back to documentation tone. If thousands of notes over time disproportionately describe certain groups as non-compliant or resistant or difficult, an AI system that's scanning that language might detect a pattern. And patterns become probabilities that influence who gets outreach or flagged or deprioritized. The AI isn't misunderstanding us, it's operationalizing us. So now we have to ask something harder. When you write non-compliant, are you just describing a moment or are you contributing to a data set? And if that data set eventually shapes automated decision making, are we ethically responsible for that downstream effect? We may not control the algorithm, but we are feeding it, whether we know it or not. And I know that's provocative, but it's true at this point. So here are 3 questions I really want you to sit with. Number 1, what power lives inside documentation? Number 2, are we responsible only for what we intend or also for what is reasonably foreseeable? And number 3, if neutrality isn't perfect, can we at least commit to precision? Because precision is different from labeling. Client declined services or a client expressed frustration about wait times. Those are observable. Client was manipulative or a client was resistant. Those are interpretive. And interpretation repeated at scale becomes a structural signal. This isn't about policing language to the point of paralysis. Sometimes behavior is dangerous, and sometimes clarity is important. It really matters. But we have to be honest. Sometimes we write from frustration and fatigue and burnout, and that tone gets fossilized into records. And also, if the client read your note tomorrow, would they recognize themselves or would they recognize your mood? That question alone can recalibrate a chart, in my opinion, and my experience. Documentation feels administrative, but it is ethical architecture. And now it's technological architecture. So maybe the question is no longer, did I document what happened? Maybe it's what system am I helping to build with my words? And that's not fear-based, it's awareness-based. And awareness is still our responsibility. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next time on Ethics and Other Messy Things.